Tantra Illuminated with Dr. Christopher Wallace is a journey through the depths of the human experience, as viewed through the lens of the tradition called non-dual Shaiva Tantra. This multi-format podcast delves into the fascinating world of classical Tantra and its intersections with philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, human development, and the broader world of spirituality. Today's episode is a conversation, and I'm speaking with Dr. Kavithā Chinnaiyan. Kavithā is a cardiologist, and she's listed as one of the best doctors in America, with well over 100 publications in peer-reviewed academic journals and textbooks. She's also a Śrī Vidyā initiate who has received all the various initiations and empowerments of the Śrī Vidyā Tantric lineage. She's the author of 4 books for a general readership, including Glorious Alchemy on the Lalita Sahasranama and Fractals of Reality, which is the most detailed study in the English language of the Śrīcakra, also known as the Śrī Yantra, the incredible mystic diagram of Śrī Vidyā, which has become famous worldwide as an image, even though almost nobody knows what that image actually represents. So if you're interested, check out her latest book, Fractals of Reality. And Kavithā is the founder of the Svatantra Institute, through which she teaches retreats and seminars on yogic philosophy, tantric practices and rituals, and human development through wellness science, nutrition, classical tantra, non-duality, and Ayurveda. So she's a bit of a polymath. She has expertise in several different fields, and she's quite an articulate and brilliant person. I respect her a lot, and as you'll hear, this is a great conversation, and hopefully the first of several conversations that I'll have with her on this podcast. So we get into esoteric topics a little bit, but we also cover some of the most important and central issues in the spiritual life. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. I'm speaking with Kavithā Chinnaiyan. I'm very happy to have you on the podcast. You are such a deeply learned and deeply practiced representative of the tradition, and I know you're familiar with both all the teachings of mainstream Hinduism, we could call it, but also of non-dual tantra, of Śrī Vidyā. You've received oral transmissions from great teachers and masters, and all of that weaves into what you share with the world. But I'm just going to ask you to start with a little encapsulation of your journey, something about, starting whether it's in childhood or from whatever age you want, how you arrived here, basically, and what were the most pivotal moments on that journey for you.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here, Hareesh. It's just such a pleasure to talk with you. And thank you for that very kind introduction. Well, I grew up in a Shaivaite family. So in a Veera Shaiva family or a Lingayat family. So that, the principles of some of the aspects of Shaivism were already kind of woven into my early childhood. But yet, nobody in my family was really asking the kinds of questions I would say I was drawn to. And um, people were actually more annoyed with me for asking those questions, which is, why are we doing this ritual? Or what is the purpose of this? Or why am I here? Or why are we doing all this? What is the purpose of all this? It seems to me that I remember going to weddings and things like that as a young girl and thinking, my God, this seems like such a bore. People are going to get married, then they're going to have children, and those children are going to go to school, and those children are going to get married, and then they're going to have more children. It seemed like such a burden, this whole cycle that I felt in kind of intuitively. And in high school, uh, in India, it's very common to go to these schools known as convent schools, which are schools run by Christian missionaries and nuns and so on. And in high school, I went to such a school, and I found Christianity extremely simple and sweet and delicious. And it seemed really straightforward. So I went back home one day and I announced to my parents, I'd like to convert to Christianity. And let me tell you, that did not go well.
Wow.
and and very miraculously, it was around the same time, I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, uh, my school, even though it was a convent school, had a lot of teachers who were non-Christian. And one of them was a Sanskrit scholar, and she was my math teacher. And she was a Vedantin, and just an absolutely radiant being, Mrs. Anantalakshmi. And she just walked into my class one day. Yeah, it was a biology class, and she looked at me. I was sitting in the back, and she said, "You." She didn't even know my name. She said, "You. I'm going to meet you today at 4:30 outside of my office." And everybody was intimidated by this woman. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know what I did, but this does not sound good. So that evening, I went and met her, and she handed me this little Bhagavad Gita. And she said, starting today, I'm going to teach you to chant. And you're going to go to Bhagavad Gita competitions, the chanting competitions. I never asked her why and what happened. I just said, okay, because that's the kind of response she commanded.
And
So,
you were like 15 at this time, something like that?
yeah, I was in eighth grade.
Yeah. And she
And
just saw your potential.
I don't know what happened. It was just weird. I mean, it was a new school for me. My parents and we moved all over India when I was growing up. So I went to a new school every 2 or 3 years, and so it was a brand new school for me. And I didn't know that anyone knew me. And but I was a singer, and she perhaps saw me singing on stage sometime. I don't know what happened, and what she saw or what happened, but she started teaching me to chant. And that was life changing. It was the first time that I was introduced to Vedic chanting. And very gradually, she started inviting me to her house and teaching me parts of the Bhagavatam. And n- she went beyond just teaching me to chant. She would take some of the most pivotal concepts of the Bhagavad Gita and teach me how to live that in a
Mm.
way that a 14, 15-year-old could understand. And after that, I went to many Bhagavad Gita chanting competitions. I just began to love the sound of Sanskrit, the sound of chanting, the rhythm, the chandas, the meter, the beauty of chanting and the rules of chanting. Everything was fascinating. So I just kind of went on studying that on my own after I went to medical school. And
And sorry, before that, you learned to sing Vox from the Veera Shaiva tradition.
In Kannada. Yes, Vachana. So I
Oh yeah,
grew up
Vachanas. Yeah.
Vachana. Yeah, Vachana. So I grew up singing those, and it was a thing. We all sang that. It was part of my upbringing, and yeah, and then I went to med school, and uh, throughout med school, I continued to memorize and learn verses of the Bhagavad Gita, and it became kind of my go-to. And after med school, I came to the US actually as part of a Vachana singing group. Can you believe
Hmm.
that? That's how I
And
came here. I was the lead singer for this group that sang Vachanas by
wow.
especially the women of the Lingayat community, the unknown poets, women poets of the Virashaiva community, the ancient ones. We picked all of their vachanas and set them to music, and we were singing this, and I was the lead singer, one of the two lead singers, and we were invited to performances in the UK and in the US. And so that's how I came to the US.
And at this time, did you have any sense of the spiritual depth that is hinted at in those vachanas? Were you starting to like realize, oh, this is not just something I grew up with, but there's real wisdom here?
Yeah, absolutely. It so happened that in the final year of my medical school and my internship, I don't really know how this started, but I started being invited to various community gatherings of Virashaivas to come and give discourses on these vachanas, and in English to large groups of people. And
And you're in
uh,
your early 20s at this time.
I was in my early 20s. Yeah, so I was 21, 22, and I remember going to many, many of these and talking about the inner meaning or the message of these vachanas being much more than just um, beautiful pieces set to music or being sung in some community for competition or for fun. So, and I also remember at a couple of these events, there were these Virashaiva Swamis who would be presiding and um, really being appreciative that a young person was so interested in this. So, yeah, and then I came to the US and then got really busy with my career and training and
And let me just pause just for the listeners. A lot of people might have seen the book Speaking of Shiva, which has
Mhm.
translations of some of these vachanas
Yes.
from the Virashaiva tradition.
Yeah.
But of course, there are far more. That book just translated, some small percentage of this corpus of wisdom in the form of song, in the form of poetry that has
Yeah.
been preserved for now many hundreds of years.
Yeah. And people, I think in the West, primarily know of Basavanna and Akkamahadevi, primarily, but there were many, many, many other poets and thinkers and sages
And
in the
other
village.
female poets. It wasn't only Akkamahadevi.
Yes, many of them. And like I said, we picked the female poets, you know, poetry and vachanas and set them to music in this particular program that we did. And they're all very poignant. And these were very ordinary people. These were cobblers and people that cleaned homes, and these were people that did quite menial jobs that were part of this tradition initially, the Veerashaiva tradition. So,
Hmm.
and that was really the hallmark of this community, that everybody was welcome to this round table, so to speak. And
Yeah, it was egalitarian.
exactly, and that
Yeah.
everybody was equal, and whether you're a male or a female or whatever, and it must be said that it's in the Veershaiva community that you begin to see this concept of equality, of particularly between men and women. For instance, everybody gets diksha.
Mm.
So men and women are given diksha in this tradition. Everybody wears an ishtalinga, and um, in fact, we can't get married without diksha. You have
Mm.
to be married in order to. I mean, you have to have diksha in order to be married, and you have to know how to do the Shiva puja and so on.
Mm.
It's incredible that we are talking about this a day before Shivaratri.
Yeah, it's good timing.
It's
And
good time.
do you see a non-dual view in most of these vachanas? Because it seems like in the ecstatic devotional expression, some of
Mhm.
these poets are saying everything is Shiva, everything is the divine.
Yes.
And is that, do you think that the primary orientation, even if modern Virashaiva communities don't quite understand it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you see the and that's what really attracted me to the vachanas, when I was growing up, is that there was something so deep and um, uh, very subtle about this, which is, if and you have translated some of them and you've spoken about some of them in your blog posts, for instance. That's how I found you, actually.
Mm.
It's um, when Basavanna talks about this body being the temple, and the legs being the pillars, and the head
Yeah.
being the bola, and so on. It's just very deep, talking about the oneness and the common thread in life, which is coming from that non-dual perspective.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I tell people who are doing the modern yoga, modern postural yoga, this phrase, the body is the temple of God. It doesn't come from Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it comes from these tantric and non-dual traditions, such
Yeah,
as the Virashaivas. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I feel very fortunate to have been brought up in that and to be exposed in that and to have had those questions that led me kind of deeper into understanding, at least to a certain extent,
Mm, mm.
the teachings of the Vachanas. Yeah, so that was really my life in India.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And when did you meet the first person? Well, I guess this teacher you had in high school was already your first guru, actually.
yes, yes, very much.
Um, so when did you meet the next person that you regarded as a guru of yours?
Yeah, so that happened. I came to the US, did my residency in medicine, and then trained in cardiology, got really busy. And it was during that time that I found advanced yoga practices, AYP.
Mm,
And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's an open source um, kind of forum of really these advanced yoga practices,
mm,
meditation and pranayama and various kriya practices. And I found that, and I do consider the founder of that, who goes by the name Yogani, to be one of my um, most precious teachers, because he's the one who encouraged me to start writing. I had a very close relationship with him, and he guided me personally and really shaped me as a writer, because I was sharing a lot of my spiritual experiences on that forum, and he said, you need to write, and you need to
wow.
write more than this.
And
And
and did you ever meet him in person?
no, because he's anonymous.
He's a bit of a recluse.
Yes, nobody
Yeah.
knows his real name or who he is. um, and he just did not want any of that. And His philosophy is that the guru is in you, and so
Mm.
don't rely on any external gurus. And that was helpful at that stage in my quest. And some of the most important fundamental principles of spirituality I learned from him. And yeah,
Yeah. And this is amazing. I want to highlight this because you were brought up in a fairly traditional environment in Karnataka,
yes,
and then you were open-minded enough to learn from somebody. And of course, Yogani wasn't just presenting, his own insights, but he was organizing material from across the yoga tradition,
yeah.
but still, like, you were open minded enough to receive that transmission from this person who might not even be Indian. That really speaks highly, I think, of your quest for truth, because many of your countrymen and countrywomen, would have been more skeptical or hesitant.
Yeah, and I've never had that issue. For me, the knowledge is is something that I have such a hunger and a thirst for that um, I don't have an issue learning from anyone. And I never even thought of that actually until you just mentioned it.
That's
And
amazing. That's beautiful.
yeah, I've never really thought of it because, as I've had many non-Indian teachers, including Paul Mueller, and
Mm,
so no, it's never occurred to me. And Yogani, I had this incredible relationship with Yogani where I felt, even though I had never met him, and but we communicated a lot. He was truly like this teacher who cared about my spiritual growth.
mm,
He was like a parent almost, in many ways, where he really and he pushed me in the right way because he picked up on a talent, a gift that I had with writing, and basically just kept pushing me to explore that.
mm,
And then he's the one who told me you must go teach meditation. And it's because of him that I started this Heal Your Heart program in my hospital that ran for 7 years.
mm,
And
mm.
yeah, so
And the AYP practices are still, the resources are still available online, right?
they are available. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're easily available and they're beautiful. The only issue I have with um, such an approach, which I also discussed with Yogani, when you don't have a system of confirming your experience, it
Mm,
becomes a thing of, well, it's my experience, so it must be true, you know.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
yes, that is true. Your everybody's experience is valid, but that is not the experience.
Yeah.
And
Not all experiences are on the right track, as it were.
exactly, and not all of them are going to take you where you want to go. And you need guidance in many at many different points in on your journey. If you don't have the right guidance, you think you're going someplace, but you're not. You're actually going in the opposite direction. and
Yeah.
and that's the issue I have with prematurely coming to this conclusion that I'm only going to rely on my inner guru. Yes, that is the absolute truth. And yet, you do need an external mirror at various points in your journey. And
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Otherwise, things can go off the rails slowly. That's the real hazard, when they go off the rails slowly and you're not getting feedback.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. And yeah, so And it so happened that at the same time that I was practicing, like, and I'm of the type in life in general, in my career, in my life, when I decide to do something, I'm all in,
Mm,
and when I'm all in, it's very intense. So
mm.
when I was doing those practices, whether it meant waking up at 3 and practicing for 2-3 hours before I went off to work, and or coming back home and doing this, it didn't matter. It was all in,
And you
always.
discovered AYP in your residency, right?
Actually, yeah, it was in my fellowship, in my cardiology fellowship. Yes,
Intense sadhana and intense medical fellowship at the same time.
and I had two little kids, one an infant.
Ah,
So
wow.
yeah, so yeah, everything was intense, and this is what my guru always says to me now. Every time he introduces me, he says, Meet this person who never does anything that is not intense."
Yeah. But this is good for listeners to hear that, because a lot of people are, oh, I don't have time for committed practice
Yeah.
because I have kids or because I have a full-time job. And you had a committed practice uh, every day
Yes.
while doing all the rest of this because it mattered to you that much.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, everybody knows this quote from Ramakrishna, right? Where um, Ramakrishna and many others, who you quote this and you say, how badly do you want God? And your head is thrust underwater, and you have to want God like you want air,
Yeah.
right? And I definitely had that, that kind of intensity. So, um, but at the same time that I was in AYP, um, I I joined Chinmaya Mission and started studying Vedanta. And I did that for 10 years.
Mm,
So this was the same time that my kids were growing up. So I would take them every Sunday to Bal Vihar. And then I was in study groups. I was studying the Bhagavad Gita. I was studying various Vedantic texts. And so for me, being in AYP on one side of doing all these practices, and on the other side, really seriously studying Vedanta, were perfect.
mm,
So they were perfect because it was just, there is this, the study of the texts and the foundation of these practices. So it was always
mm.
very grounded because of that. And it so happened that after about a decade of doing that, it just I was just pulled into Śrī Vidyā, and and that actually happened in a meditative experience. I'd never heard of Śrī Vidyā. I was
Mm,
meditating one morning, and I heard this. I heard this voice that kept telling me, "Take up Śrī Vidyā," and
mm.
uh, I didn't know what it was. I had never heard of it, and then I looked it up. Well, I would be remiss if I did not mention that that voice was of Babaji, and I was very deeply connected with him in a you know on in various realms. I would say various
So
planes.
just to clarify, this is the Babaji who's who, the guru's guru of Yogananda, made famous by Yogananda, right?
Mahavatar Baba.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and who is a Mahasiddha that people experience as being beyond time and space and giving transmissions in
Yes.
various ways. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So at the time, when I was doing these intense practices, um, I could easily connect with various masters on various planes, and he I was very much drawn to Babaji, and one morning, I just kept hearing his voice saying Śrī Vidyā, and I don't know what it was. So I looked it up, and there was a school that kept coming up, which I explored, and he happened to be the Adi Guru of that lineage. And I reached out to the guru of that lineage, and I said, I'd like to have Diksha. And very kindly, he agreed, and I got initiated in Śrī Vidyā and started practicing.
And was that in India or was that in New York State?
No, this was in India. This was the first Śrī Vidyā school that I was involved in.
Okay.
The way they do that in their school is it's a very systematic level 1, level 2, level 3 kind of a initiation, and I got all of them over time, and I was practicing with this. And it's just, life is such that it just takes you from one thing to another thing to another thing. Um, and at this, I was also still involved in AYP, and somebody mentioned the direct path in AYP. And I just picked up a book on the direct path, Standing as Awareness by Greg Good, and started reading it. And this was at a time when I was in so deep in my spiritual practice that I had some profound experiences. But when I picked up that book and I started reading it, 2 pages in, and something happened to me. I don't know if you've read that book. It's a magnificent introduction to the direct path. And it is, the direct path comes from the stream of Sri Atmananda Krishna Menon, one of the 3 sages, contemporary sages, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, and Atmananda Krishna Menon.
Yeah.
And so his prolific student was Jean Klein, who then taught Francis Lucille, who is a teacher of Greg Good and Rupert Spira and so on. And so Greg's book, when I started reading that book, in that second page, he just speaks so sweetly and plainly about the direct path that I experienced a profound shift in my stance. A profound shift. And it has never been the same since then. My perspective, everything has changed, and it has never been the same since then. And so I got very deeply interested in the direct path, and it made absolute sense after 10 years of studying Vedanta and yoga in this intense way. This was like a natural progression. And I reached out to Greg, and I would say he's the next teacher who had the most kind of powerful impact on me. And so Greg became my mentor, my friend, my guide, and my teacher of the direct path for several years. So I studied with him, and it was very deeply revealing. And then I was very active. I was actually one of the moderators of his forum on on social media, on Facebook. And around the same time, I was also practicing Śrī Vidyā. I was, completely involved in this, exploring the goddess in the Śrī Vidyā tradition. And on Facebook, I saw this advertisement for a book called The Goddess and the Guru. And I was, it caught my eye, and I purchased the book and I read it, and I read it nonstop. And it is the description of Guruji, Sri Amritanandanatha Saraswati of Devipuram. And uh,
And had you met him? I forget when he passed.
no, that's the thing.
Yeah.
And so when I read that book, I was in d- deep depression that
Mm.
here is this great sage, Guruji, who was not too far from me when I was growing up, and I hadn't even heard of him.
Mm.
And I was deeply saddened. And by then, he had already passed. And I was so sad that I had not met him. And my guru, who was not my guru then, he had written the foreword for that book. And I thought, well, I'd like to meet him. But you see, I was already a Śrī Vidyā initiate.
Okay,
And
okay.
yeah, and I
But
didn't know.
your initiation was somewhere else. It wasn't at Devipuram.
No, no, it was
Right.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
And but I mean, I just had this deep desire to meet Aya, who had written the foreword for this book. And yet I didn't know what I would say to him.
Mm.
Other than I just want to be in your presence. You see, I didn't really have a request.
And by the
And
way, it's a weird coincidence. I helped get that book published from behind the scenes.
yes, I know you told me.
Yeah. So we were already connected before we knew each other.
Exactly, in so many ways. So I looked up Aya, of course, the Śrī Vidyā temple in New York has a wonderful website. There's a lot about Aya. And I was like, I don't know how to connect with him. I don't know how to, I mean, nobody publishes his email or his number, you see. And then I just gave it up. I said, I was talking to Devi and said, you do whatever you want. And you're going to do that anyway. I'm just going to forget about this now, not fret about it. And like 2 days later, I'm in this forum, the Direct Path forum, talking about some experience. And I was going deeper and deeper into this, in this particular nuanced thing of a meditative experience. And some guy responds to me in a reply to a comment saying, "Oh, by the way, Kavitha, I've had the same thing happen to me in Śrī Vidyā." Mind you, this is a direct path forum. Like, there's no reason to ever bring up Śrī Vidyā here.
Yeah.
Like, that's interesting. And so we started having a conversation offline. And I shyly brought up this thing, and I said, "Hey, have you heard of this book, The Goddess and the Guru?" He's like, "Yeah, I met Guruji." I was so fascinated. I said, "Really? You met Guruji?" And I said, "By any chance, do you know Aya?" And he says, "Yeah, he's my uncle."
Wow. Yeah. And Aya is an affectionate name, right? He's also known as Haranji. Yeah.
Well, not G, Haranaya.
Haranaya. Yeah.
Haranaya. His name is Sri Chaitanyanandanatha Saraswati.
Okay,
And
there we go.
yes, and we call him, he's affectionately known as Haranaya. And yeah, and he happened to be his uncle. And I said, "Oh my goodness, would you introduce me?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was on vacation with my family. We were just sitting down for breakfast, and I get a text from him saying, "Here's Aya's number. Call him. He's expecting your call." So yeah, I pulled away from my family and I called Aya, and I heard his booming voice, and I just knew. I just knew, this is it. This is the end of my path. And um, yeah, it was quite magical. And that's it. He said, he actually gave me a transmission right there on the phone, and he said, "Come during Navratri." And so that year, I went during Navratri, and he formally initiated me. And yeah, that was that was it. So that's this long story of going, uh, from the very confused kid to a less confused upasaka.
And just for the listeners, Haran Aya's temple, his place is Raja Rajeshwari Peetham in Rush, New York.
Yes.
And I've
So
been there myself a couple times. Beautiful place, beautiful being. I just met Haranaya maybe once, maybe twice.
yeah,
So yeah, it's a very special place that many people don't realize is there in upstate New York, not far from Rochester.
yeah, yeah. Very, very close to Rochester, and it's a Peetham. It is where Devi lives as Raja Rajeshwari, and he is the Peethadipati of that temple. And it's it's a very unique temple. Unlike all other temples everywhere else, including India, it is one of the, I would say, rare temples. I don't know any other temple of its kind where all the rituals are done by householders who are all Śrī Vidyā upasakas. They're all trained by Aya. And so there are no formal priests. Everybody is an upasaka who does the pujas of the temple, and there are no corners cut. Everything is as in the agamas. The temple itself is built according to Agama Shastra, and uh, everything is precise. And if you know Aya, everything has a reason, everything has a um, methodology, and it must be followed according to that methodology. So,
Yeah,
um,
and it's beautiful because this is as it was in the old days. In classical tantra, it's exactly this that it's all about the householder practitioner, not
yeah,
about hereditary priests. And of course, hereditary priests are doing all the rituals in all the temples in India,
yeah,
and that's not wrong. But if it's a tantric temple, then it's much more traditional to
yeah,
do it as Haranaya is doing it with the actual practitioners doing
yes,
the ritual ceremonies and running the place.
yes.
That it's really wonderful that that's the case there.
Yeah, and during special occasions, for instance, during Navratri, there is this whole structure that is constructed where the main rituals are done, where the main deity of Navratri is established, and you cannot enter that. Nobody can enter that unless you are an initiate. You have to have at least Panchadashi mantra in order to enter that space. So it is very revered and respected, um, and it's wonderful because if you really want, and Aya's philosophy is really beautifully described in this book called "The Goddess Lives in Upstate New York," and it's a wonderful book for anyone that wants to know more about Aya, more about this temple. And he's very clear about this, that if we want to continue to propagate um, the nuances of Sanatana Dharma, it has to be done this way. And it's unlike any other temple I've seen, because when you go there, it's not just householders, it's kids. These are youngsters, teenagers, young adults who are performing all these rituals, and they are much more knowledgeable about these things than most Hindus in India. And uh, it's just wonderful to see that place.
Yeah, and I just want to circle back to something extraordinary, which is that you could see the compatibility of what Greg Good was teaching and your Śrī Vidyā sadhana,
Yeah,
which is quite rare. I know quite a few Śrī Vidyā upasakas, and they get very focused on, okay, this is the way, and I need to do my purashcharana, my assigned regimen of mantra repetition, and I can't look anywhere else, you know. And I think it would be hard for many of them to recognize, that the transmission that someone like Greg Good is giving is not only compatible but complementary to
Yeah.
Śrī Vidyā sadhana. And of
Yep.
course, there's even a specific reason for that. As you mentioned, there's this thread of what's called Kashmir Shaivism, which is of course a tantric teaching
Hmm.
that goes, through Jean Klein and to all the way down to people like Greg Good and Rupert Spira,
Yeah.
whose teachings are more tantric, right? They're not renunciatory. They're not teaching you to turn away from the world. They're teaching you to recognize the nature of reality in the world, in your
Yeah.
life,
Yes.
and there's no obstacles. It's a very tantric teaching. There are no obstacles that are possible. There are no karmic obstacles that are actually possible, as some people think, to this recognition and this realization. And
Yeah.
I think it's such a perfect complementary message to the rigors of Śrī Vidyā sadhana. And
Yes.
do you want to say anything more about how those two came together for you?
Absolutely. I do. I do think that the direct path is a very tantric path. In fact, the way I have seen Greg live his life and be in the world is a very tantric thing to do, even though I don't think he even thinks of himself as a tantrika. I think of him as a tantrika. And see, the thing is, I'm very much for Purashcharana, and I've done a few of them. Um, but there is a nuance to the practices of Śrī Vidyā specifically, because there is ritual, there is japa, there is the understanding of the Śrīcakra, and then there are many other elements of this entire tradition. And the way I think about it is, you know like you said about Purashcharana, you see, for anyone listening, what is Purashcharana is this procedure of um, attaining. It is the procedure and the prescription for attaining mantra siddhi in a particular mantra that is empowered and given to you by a guru. So the first thing in Śrī Vidyā is that you can't take a mantra um, the internet or a book and practice it. Even though it may be available, it has to be a Diksha mantra, because that is empowered in a particular way. And then, in order to attain the siddhi, the effects, or the benefits of that mantra, there is a thing called Purashcharana, where you have to repeat this mantra um, X number of times. And that usually tends to be about 100,000 repetitions per syllable. And of that, so you can imagine, if it is, 15 syllabled mantra, it is 100,000 repetitions per syllable of the 15 syllables.
So I guess 1.5 million in total. My math's not that good, but I think it's that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and the purpose of doing that, this is the important thing. When you understand it from the perspective of modern neuroscience, you understand it from the perspective of yoga, you understand it from the perspective of what really this is supposed to do to your neural pathways, your electrical pathways, your chemical pathways, your hormonal pathways, neuropeptides, neural kinds of things that need to happen, not just in your brain, but in your body. Presumably, that many repetitions will help in replacing your old patterns with a newer programming system. That is the purpose of that. But what I have come to see is that if you can change your perspective through any other practice, and I'm all for direct looking and direct exploration through, and I've developed a system for this called the Renegade method. But if you can do that and you can get to your old patterns which remain hidden, and that's why so many mantra repetitions are needed. If you can get to those hidden patterns, you will not need so many mantra repetitions. That because that neural programming, the chemical and the electrical programming that needs to happen in the brain and the body can occur in a much more smoother way, where that energy of the mantra is not dissipated in simply reprogramming you, but it can be used to go higher. And just because you complete a Purusharana doesn't mean your pathways have been replaced. That's just a thing for show. So once I asked Aya about this Purusharana thing, I said, is it needed? Is it required to do Purusharana? And he said, no, you don't have to do that. You'll know when the mantra has given you its siddhi. And it may, if for somebody it may just take one repetition, for somebody it may take 30 million repetitions, who knows, right? Because that's how conditioned and deeply embedded these patterns are. Now, for me, the way I think about it, whether it is the direct path, Vedantic principles, Tantric principles, neuroscience principles, psychological principles, modern psychology, Jungian psychology, Adlerian psychology. I love all of it, and I put it all together because whatever will get to the bottom of the conditioning is good. As long as you are cultivating that very important element of satarka, there's discernment and this ability to detach from all the lower kinds of things and to transmute it. um, I think it's wonderful. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing things on a superficial level and never really get to the core of it, because for a mantra to reveal its true power, its greatness, its beauty, and its effulgence, it you have to allow it to go beyond. It has to first transform your neural patterns and then start to take you to something else. And if you can do a lot of that work through other things, that effulgence will become available to you in a much quicker way. And that's my experience, and that's the experience of many of my students. And it just confirms that it's not just complementary, but I think it is required, these kinds of methodologies.
Yeah, we totally agree about the incredible importance and indeed centrality of uprooting the conditioning, which
Yeah.
causes you to see yourself as a mere person, a very limited being separate from the whole. And what I'm wondering about, though, is like when you discovered the direct path, did it make you say, wait a second, what am I doing with all this rigorous Śrī Vidyā sadhana that takes a long time? And if you did have that moment, how did you then reconcile them? Because some people would just be like, oh gosh, I don't have to do all this work. It's just, here's the direct path. It requires no formal sadhana at all. So how did you do the reconciliation within yourself?
So, for that, I'll preface that by saying a glimpse is a glimpse is a glimpse. And a glimpse is not permanent.
Yeah.
And anything can give you a glimpse. But if you hang on to that as that being your reality, then all you do is bypass all of your issues. And and nobody should ever think, at least nobody listening to this should ever think that the direct path is saying progressive paths are not needed. Nobody is saying that. In fact, the direct path is much more fruitful when there is the rigor and the discipline of the progressive paths. A- And and if you don't have the rigor and the discipline of the progressive paths, the direct path will not lead to any kind of stability in seeing, in the glimpse. It will just remain an experience that comes and goes. So I wish I could tell you how many people I have seen who have a glimpse and they think they are enlightened, right? And whereas everything in the neurological system and in their way of being is contracted. So a meditative experience or through direct pointing, whatever, having a glimpse is extremely important, especially on the tantric path. It's really, really essential to know what it is that you are striving for. However, if you put all your eggs in that basket and you think you're done, then, you know, there's no greater Mahamaya than that.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly said, actually. It's so important to antidote kind of both sides of this misunderstanding. Those who think the progressive path is the only way, and the direct path people are just fooling themselves, and those
Right.
on the direct path side who think, oh, there's no use to all this sadhana and practices, and I think it's so important what you're saying, and it's also my experience as well. My root guru was strict, and she
Yeah.
emphasized sadhana. And the first time I met a direct path type person, that was Adyashanti, and something clicked on such a deep level, that and I had my own version of the same experience that you did, of the marriage of the two. And I feel lucky to have done sadhana in a progressive fashion before
Yeah.
encountering any kind of direct path type teachings, uh, because you're already sort of humbled enough to
Yes.
realize the necessity of continuing while still valuing. It's like you get these insights and these experiences through the direct pointing, and then you're using the sadhana to stabilize them and to deepen them.
Hmm.
And it's such a match made in heaven, really, if you're lucky enough to have it click with the grace and transmission of true teachers. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I do a lot of ritual in Śrī Vidyā. For instance, I can speak about the Śrīcakra puja, which is a the ritual adoration and worship of the Śrīcakra. And it's a very long, it's a lengthy, involved, nuanced kind of a procedure. And my guru prescribed it to me and said, you have to do this. And I did the Sri Chakra Puja every week for a year. And at a minimum, it takes 5 hours and can take up to 24 hours. So it depends on all the different things that you include in it. And it was, and I saw, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, talking with you. There are these practices that we can classify in four different ways, right? Which is the Anavapaya, the Shaktapaya, and the Shambhavapaya. The same practice can be in any of the three categories. It depends on where your what the subtlety of that practice is. What at what level of subtlety that practice is being performed is really where that spectrum lies, right? You can be doing an asana and you think that is anuvapaya, but actually it is a shambhavapaya, because you, in your internal experience, you are at that subtlest kind of level. And I had a lived experience of this in that 1 year of doing the puja, because the puja can be the ritual worship where you are, doing this, and this, and you are struggling to chant the mantra and do this and do this. And, it's like 15 things that you have to do all at once. But then as you keep doing it and doing it and doing it, the puja is the same, but you are not the same. And you have changed, and you have changed, and you keep changing, and you keep evolving. And all of a sudden, who is doing the puja and who is receiving the puja? There is no difference. And something has shifted in the performing of that ritual. It's the same thing with the mantra. You are chanting the mantra, you're doing the japa, and you're just counting, and you're thinking, when is this going to be over, whatever. And then there will come a time when you and the mantra, there is no separation, right? And then we can talk about the higher states of samadhi, and we can talk about what happens beyond that, and then going into these very subtle realms of the mahabindu and the ardhachandra and rodhini and so on. Because until you have arrived at that subtlety, the practice is simply a practice. And a lot of people are very interested in advanced practices, and it's silly. An advanced practice does not give you an advanced realization, right? It's your subtlety that takes you there. A simple practice can take you there, as long as you have subtilized your inner self, isn't it? So in this, I can say that maybe a lot of people who are Śrī Vidyā Upasikas who listen to this will disagree with me, but this has been the experience, and this has been the thing that has been very deeply encouraged by my Guru Mandala to go in this direction, that this is the right way for me to do this. And yeah, does it make sense?
Yeah, I want to highlight something you said that I think is crucially important, because if people learn these categories of practice that ultimately come from the great master Abhinavagupta, but they inflect through the whole tradition after him, of the Shambhavopaya and Shaktopaya and Anavopaya, people think of them too easily like categorical boxes. Oh, this practice goes in that box, this practice goes in that box. But what you said is absolutely right, and also important to understand for the practitioner. And it's better to understand these upayas, these skillful methods, in terms of the shakti that predominates in each one, that being icha, will, jnana, insight, and kriya, activity. Um, and then it's easier, I think, to understand how you could be doing a ritual performance and you still have this subject object separation. So you're doing an activity, you're placing an offering on the mandala or the chakra with the right mantra, and you're syncing everything up, and you're getting the activity, and you're feeling an energy in the activity, right?
Yeah.
but there can suddenly arise an insight that can shift the character of it. Maybe it could be the insight of, this is just the goddess worshiping herself.
Hmm.
And ideally it's not an insight in words, it's the actual felt sense of the insight. you know
Yes. Yeah.
and that would then, the practice is suddenly happening on that shaktopaya level.
Yeah.
And then it could even go beyond anything that requires understanding to the
Yes.
to the Shambhava level, where we could say it's something like pure flow of energy.
Yeah.
You no longer even need to understand. It's merely the goddess worshiping herself. It's even beyond that, and it's just this pure flow of energy. And
Yeah.
there's this incredible sort of magic to it. There's no subject, there's no object, there's no worshiper and worshipped. It's
Exactly.
collapsed into a unitary flow. And then from somebody looking could say, oh, look, they're doing an anavopaya practice, it's just a ritual. And not
Exactly.
realize, oh, it's like Abhinavagupta says, each upaya can collapse into the next in your
Exactly.
internal experience.
Yes. And that has been my experience actually with a lot of these things, whether it's japa or it's puja or it is anything. And I think the important thing there is discernment and the cultivation of, this. I feel like there has to be a relentless um, commitment to self-discovery, where this commitment should, in Vedanta we call it mumukshutvam, this incredible commitment and this burning desire for, I will not stop at the things that will cause me to stop. And that'll be all the kinds of emotional and psychological kinds of things which hold us all back. In general, we are emotional beings, and the emotional body. I have a mentor who says really self-realization is very easy because you just have to deal with the emotional body. I'm like, oh, just is it? That's all you have to do is work with the emotional body. But the emotional body, along with all the psychological kinds of beliefs that we have that propagate those, the constant creation and maintenance of the emotions, that is so attractive and so juicy, um, even when it is painful, because it's so familiar. And that relentless quest to go past that is the most important ingredient on a spiritual path, in my opinion, because you can get stuck everywhere, but if you have that commitment that, okay, I understand I'm stuck here, but I want to go past that, that longing to go past that is the most important thing to cultivate.
Yes, I agree. And the thing is, though, that most people seem to think that they need to understand their emotions, they need to analyze them, they need to discover where they came from or why they're arising. And yeah, that's not actually true in most cases, right? And in fact, it's an obstacle. Uh, by getting into the mind vis-a-vis the emotional body, we can actually just further instantiate those emotional patterns, because identity naturally comes in. You understand why you feel what you feel, and then believe, oh, that's the kind of person I am. And
Exactly.
identity just
Yeah.
just deepens the attachment to the. And so you're talking more about liberating the emotions through peeling away identity, peeling away the need to have a mental understanding of whatever's flowing in the emotional body. Is that right? And if so, can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, and very simply put, and this is what I teach a lot in in anything that I teach is the ability to discern the energetic experience of an emotion versus the story associated with it, because we are talking about two different parts of the brain. One is the hippocampus, one is the amygdala. You want to be able to discern between the two, right? There is the energetic contraction of the emotion, and that's the only thing we need to worry about. That's the only place that can dissolve. The changing the story to a better story is never going to make that contraction go away, right? And most of us are just trying to make that a better story. It never resolves the contraction. You're just changing the narrative basically again and again by giving it a better story, and then you come to the spiritual path, you give it a spiritual story. But the energetic contraction doesn't care what kind of an explanation you're giving to it. It's hiding there, and it's hiding in the body, right? It's only possible to be liberated in the body, and that's because this is where these things, they lie, they are playing. And to be able to understand that on a deeper level, first, you know I think of it in from a tantric perspective. I think of it as separating the shabda and the artha. you know Separate the two. The meaning that we give to all these things, if you can understand that. And it's not easy, because a lot of times we think that we are separating it, but we're still in the story. And um, and liberating those two, or discerning between the two, is the first step in understanding this energetic contraction.
Yeah, and
And
just to translate those terms, we could say shabda is like the vibration, and artha is the meaning assigned to it, the label assigned to it.
yeah,
Yeah, even naming the emotion, which is important at an earlier phase of development, being able to say, "Oh,
yes,
it's anger I'm feeling, actually," or whatever.
exactly.
But then we
Yes,
need to mature to a later stage of development where we're able to be with the vibration of experience without needing to label it in any way,
yeah,
and certainly without needing to manipulate or control it, right?
yeah,
As
yeah.
well, yeah,
Yeah, manipulate or control it, or um, allow it to run your identity. That's the other thing, where
exactly.
that thing, that I call it the CLS, in the Renegade method. I call it it's the core lack story. Everybody has a core lack story. I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, whatever. It's an energetic contraction, and it runs your life, right? Whatever is unconscious runs your life, as Jung says, and you call it your fate, basically. So that understanding where that lives, right? And that's why our tantric system of the chakras and the nadis and things are so important, so beautiful, because it lays out a map really of where these contractions lie in the body. And um, understanding how that lives there and drives you, and is creating your destiny, is like magical to see that. And if you can do that, now you can apply these techniques of the japa and the ritual and things in a very meaningful, beautiful way, right? To um, go directly to the source of that, the source of the contraction, go directly to the source of that limitation, rather than all the you know countless, endless narratives around
Yeah. So would it be right to say, it makes all the difference in the world if you're repeating the mantras, whether you're doing a formal purashcharana or not, you're repeating the mantras. You could be repeating them, some people do, with an attitude of, I'm going to win the favor of the deity, and then I'll get what I want, or the mantras will magically manifest, the life I was meant to have. It's a completely different orientation from each repetition of the mantra taking you deeper into your intention to unravel what needs to be unraveled, to become free of the conditioning and stories that you need to become free of, to see what needs to be seen, to liberate whatever remains trapped in the system that needs to be liberated. And that, keeping that intention with each spiritual practice, with each repetition of the mantra, it's a completely different paradigm from that other one I just described that many people engage in.
Yeah, but the thing is, this is, um, you can't do that. You can't have an intention like that if you're operating from a frequency that drags you down, because everything in the universe is a vibration. Every vibration has a frequency and a wavelength. um, Things that are very heavy in the system are shame and guilt and blame, and all of these things kind of really weigh you down. It's like keep you in this fear-based thing, right? Which um, is how we kind of live and operate in the world. And now having an intention is very good. But when you have these denser frequencies, they keep pulling you down because they want your attention. So the fear, if you operate from a fear-based perspective, no matter what higher intention you have, it will come down to fear. It's like, oh, I better do this or else something bad is going to happen to me. One way or the other, the fear will find its way there because it's the densest frequency, right? Then you have shame, which is the next dense frequency. So whatever is operating at that lower level, it will pull it down, because the higher frequencies of gratitude, of having a beautiful intention that is about liberation, they're not even accessible when you are operating from these frequencies. So there is a critical mass that needs to be released before you can even move to a higher place. And that's why, in our tradition, we have the Brahma Granthi, the Vishnu Granthi, the Rudra Granthi, which, is a way of saying until you break the Brahma Granthi, which is that of the dense um, kind of congealed mass of frequencies, of vibrations, of the shame, guilt, blame, fear, the four basic ones. You can't even go to the Vishnu Granthi. You can't. Any intention you have will keep you in the Brahma Granthi. And one of my uh, insights over years of learning and teaching is everybody on the spiritual path would be really well served if they have a few years of therapy with a good therapist, because the spiritual path is not a substitute for therapy. It's not a substitute for getting what you feel is lacking in your life. In fact, the spiritual path, in all likelihood, will take away what you really value from a fear based perspective. And it's important to come to it from a well balanced perspective if you want the benefit of the spiritual path. But if you come to it as, well, it's going to solve my problems, I think it sets you up for disappointment.
So let me ask you this, because I think you've made a really, really great point. You've essentially said that if you are just dealing with so much fear that feels like it's right at or near the core of your being, then these highfalutin intentions are going to be an attempt to kind of fake it till you make it, and it's not really going to work. So, what do you say to somebody who realizes, oh my gosh, yes, I mean, I have so much fear under the surface once I look and admit what's there that it's motivating most of my actions? uh, what do you say to them? Do you say, oh, just go to therapy and come back in a few years, or do you have a way? Do you have an advice about how to do sadhana when that is the reality? Then, and what is it?
Well, I have a better thing, and that is my system of inquiry, which is called the Renegade method. which is a very systematic algorithm of finding these things and understanding them from a perspective of, really somatic work, and the dealing with the energies directly, and understanding the difference between what is there and what is the narrative that is of that. And so it's a very simple algorithm, highly effective, and I stand by it because it has helped me. Is so much. I can hardly tell you how much it has helped me. Everything in my spiritual practice has improved because of this kind of work that I do with this system. And I'll say something that might be shocking for many people, and I say this all the time to my students. Most of us, we come to the spiritual path, not most of us, many of us come to the spiritual path because something in our life is not working. There's something that we want, we're not getting it, some aspect of life is unfulfilled, and there's frustration, and we think, okay, fine, that's not working, let me go to spirituality, right? And but that unfulfilled, that unmet need of that high, lower density keeps pulling you, because you cannot ignore it. And you keep searching in the spiritual path for an answer to something that is not spiritual. It's a very fundamental, basic need, right? And what I have come to see from years of teaching is, when I make space and show people how to get that need fulfilled, do you know, most people are not even interested in the spiritual path, because what they're looking for is not all this stuff. What they want is a solution for their life,
Like
and
to
they
be
think
to be free of that fear, for example.
that's it. I want to make more money. Make more money. Don't think spirituality will solve your money problems. I want to have a better relationship. I'll show you how to have a better relationship. You don't need spirituality for that. You see?
But
You
what if
can't.
someone wants to make more money because they don't feel safe in the world, they don't feel secure, and they think that's the solution,
Yeah.
and for many people it doesn't actually work. There is no amount of money that magically makes them feel safe. So
Yes.
isn't sadhana a part of it then, to because spiritual practice can give you an experience, if not a connection, to a deeper level of reality, in which you discover that you are safe, that you didn't know that you were safe all
Yeah.
along, and that
Yeah.
you can repose in this. Like, I'm just saying it very briefly and clumsily, but isn't there some
I know
truth to
what you're
that?
saying, and yes, you can have a certain degree of security in a glimpse, for instance, right? You can have a certain, like I said earlier, you can have a certain degree of security. But here's the thing: there are deep sanskaras, which, again, all our shastras will say a critical mass of your sanskaras need to be fulfilled in order for you to move on from that, right? If your deep longing is to be financially secure, no glimpse is actually going to make you feel fulfilled. And not being fulfilled is only going to keep that at a glimpse stage and not allow you to go beyond that.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
are
I
very
get
few
it. So,
people, right? There are very few people who will say, "Oh, you know what? I don't need this money at all. I'm just going to be in this thing of absolute trust and surrender that whatever I need will be given to me." That is that is a different stage than using spirituality to bypass issues. And what I found again and again and again in my in you know the years I have been teaching, my limited experience is even in my limited experience is when people find that there is a solution to their problem that they thought was unsolvable, and you solve that through through radically assessing yourself and seeing that you're not unworthy. You actually can do a lot of things. You are capable and you are empowered. Then the spiritual concepts become less important. They don't even want that anymore. Well, actually, what they wanted was this, and once they have it, they need to live it for a while before the real spirituality starts to call you. And
Yes. So some people really do need to make money to discover that money can't really fulfill them, or that it gives them some sense of security, but it
yep.
reveals the authentic longing that still remains, and they had to go through that process for themselves if that's the nature of their samskaras, and there is no bypassing it, basically.
Yeah, and it was my experience, right? Because I just went from one achievement to another, to another, to another. It was never ending. It was like um, nothing could fulfill me. You see, I just went from one thing to another thing to another thing. It's like I, I don't know how many papers I've published, more than 150 papers in peer-reviewed journals. I've had leadership positions in all kinds of things. Uh, whatever goal somebody said I could not have, I had to have it. And it was to prove to myself that I could do it. And eventually, after all of that, it was like shocking to see, wait, I still remain unfulfilled, right? And it was not this that I was seeking at all. And so it was a complete revelation, to see that what I'm seeking is actually the end of seeking. I'm tired of it.
Yeah, and you had to do it though. If you hadn't accomplished all that, there would be this part of your mind going, oh, but maybe it's there in the accomplishment. You had to do it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. You
Yeah.
have to do all those things. There's a critical mass of vasanas that you must fulfill. You can't take someone who is really starved for a sexual relationship and say, here, do this mantra. It's not going to fulfill them. They have to go through that. They have to go through that experience and to see that, okay, I've done this. I've been there, done that, and I've tasted that. I've bit into that fruit. I've taken, I've partaken of that fruit. It's fulfilled now, and now there's something else remaining.
So I can see we're going to need to have another interview because you've raised so much worth diving even further into. But in the time we have left, uh, tell us a little bit about the Renegade method. Like, why does it have that name? And and what does it do? What does it seek to accomplish?
Yeah. See, um, the renegade. Now, a renegade is a person that goes against the grain, right? So goes against the flow, goes against the stream. If you see our ordinary way of being, our senses are turned outward, our attention is turned outward. We are constantly seeking our fulfillment through the objects of the world. And we don't really have a good way to turn around and look at the one that is seeking the objects of the world. And so the renegade method is that algorithm of turning around and looking, deeply looking at our hidden, our subconscious beliefs, our drives, our way in which we carry ourselves, which is our vibe, which never lies. You can say you're a great, sadhaka, or a great scholar, or a great practitioner, or a great doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever. It doesn't matter. As soon as you walk in the room, your vibe speaks for itself. And to understand that, it really does take skilled inquiry with the right kinds of questions, with the right kind of attitude, and with the right kind of focus in particular ways at this mass of contractions that lie in the body. So the Renegade method is really a somatic method that I've developed that goes in, looks, stops this flow outward and turns inward, turns towards those very contractions that drive our motivations, and reveals itself. And this is true empowerment. When you understand, for instance, and for me, as an example, my personal example is when I realized that my way of being is that of a victim, that things happen to me. And it was a big revelation that, wait, this is my vibe. This is the thing that is speaking for me and making me go here and do all these things, all my achievements and all of this and all of that. That all comes from this, vibe, very subtle vibe. And so once you understand what that is and how that is operating, you just embody that because you're doing it anyway. And now you consciously embody that. You become super conscious of it. And this is the thing with patterns. They are powerful as long as they are unconscious. They start to lose their power when the light of awareness starts to shine on it, right? On them, on these patterns, a pattern, many patterns. And then something happens. Something very magical happens in your being. You create space. You create space and freedom in your body, actually. Things free up in your body. Diseases can be healed, chronic pain can be healed. And, um, just start to move more freely in the world. So that is the Renegade method.
Okay, so this is wonderful. Let me see if I've got it right, because I think we agree that motive for spiritual practice matters. It matters a lot. And if I'm wrong, correct me in a moment, but let me take you through my line of reasoning. And many people have a skewed motive for practice, or they don't even know what their real motive is. And what the Renegade method can do is it can show you what you really want. And if the spiritual path is not serving that goal, it can help you, take the actions that do serve the goal of what you really want. And it can also then subsequently or in parallel clarify for you the motives for your spiritual practice in such a way as to empower that practice to make it much, much more likely to bear fruit. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. It's really a way of coming into absolute authenticity. A deep vulnerability, a deep authenticity. It's just like you stop fooling yourself. This the self delusion and the self deception that drives our motives, they need to go, right? And that, until that happens, no practice can really bear its fruit. And so, we haven't even gotten into the problems, the pitfalls, for instance, of left-handed tantra, and how much self-deception and delusion there can be in that, right? Of course, in all types of tantra, but tantra is especially prone to that. And so,
Of course. Yeah, because
yeah,
it's a radically, if it works, it's empowering, and that
yes,
empowerment can empower ego delusion as much as it could empower anything else.
exactly. It can empower your self-deception. So yeah, so that's the way Shakti works, right? It's power basically. So yeah, and it's all beautiful, but you have to come into that authenticity to see the ridiculousness of your patterns, see the ridiculousness of your beliefs, and the humor and the irony of it. You know, you say you want something, but actually your deep motive will be the exact opposite, and you don't even know that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ability to laugh at yourself is always a good sign on
Oh
this
yeah,
journey.
yeah. What are you going to do? And this is what I tell my students all the time. There's no prize for enlightenment. Nobody cares. So might as well laugh about it.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love this. We need to have a second conversation because there's more topics to delve into. Because part of what's wonderful about you as a teacher is you shed so much light on subtlety and nuance, which turns out to be crucial on the spiritual path. Um,
Yeah.
we need to talk about pitfalls. I want to hear about more of your pivotal moments. Your
You can hear about my pitiful moments too. There
well,
have been plenty.
it's almost a Freudian slip, right? Because often our pitiful moments turn into pivotal moments. It's amazing. Um,
And there are countless of them.
yeah, yeah. So this is a wonderful conversation, and of course we're gonna give people the links to all your various offerings and so on. The Renegade method, Svatantra Institute. You've developed a new thing called VAC, which we didn't get to talk about yet, but we could talk about it next time. So,
Yes.
but let's see what comes. If I just ask you, what do you want to close with, like, just in case someone didn't hear the next conversation we're going to have, what do you want to leave them with that might be one of the most important messages for them to hear if they're engaged in all this spiritual seeking and they're looking here and there and they've had some great experiences and they've had some moments and yet they often feel stuck, and they're not sure if they're really awakening or just learning new things and having new cultural experiences. Is there anything that you would say to those folks, which are many, and feel free to take a moment to see what comes intuitively.
Yeah. The most most hard earned thing for me as a sadhika, as a practitioner, has been this: don't take yourself so seriously. And the other thing I will say is something I say all the time, every day, which is Devi Sharanam. Just stop taking yourself seriously and just give it up. Just give it up and say, you know what, Devi, do whatever.
Give
Because
it
you're going to do that anyway. So
give
let
it
me
up to
just
the
stay with
goddess.
you. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
And would you agree that if you're authentically seeking for something deeper, for truth under whatever name, then in some mysterious way, whatever whatever you're looking for, that which you are looking for is also looking for you, and it won't fail to find you. We go through so many bizarre twists and turns and peregrinations, but I think you agree that we can assure people that if your longing for truth is genuine, what you're longing for is longing for you as well, and can't fail to find you.
Yes, but it's not necessarily if your longing for truth is genuine, because I do think that all, you know, 8 billion of us is seeking that in one way or another. We may not know that, but we are all seeking that. We are all seeking completion. We are all seeking that thing that we can't name. There is nobody that is not seeking that. All creatures are Brahma Kita Janani, it says in the Lalita Sahasranama. There is nothing that is not moving towards that. So it doesn't even matter whether your seeking is genuine or not. You will always be given what you require and what you need. There is no doubt about that. We are always continuously being given what we require. And life is that kind. And if what you require is disease, you'll be given that because that is your pathway to awakening. If what you require is poverty, that's what you will be given because that is your unique path to awakening. There is no mistake in this. So you don't even have to rely so much on your genuine wanting or not. Like, how do I know whether my longing is genuine or not? I don't know. I don't know that. Who am I to know that? It's like, who am I to evaluate my own longing? You know? So, doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah. In fact, you can't. You can't know for sure.
Yeah,
And we certainly agree that the reason that taking refuge in the goddess works is because you are already in her arms. So,
exactly. We're all playing in her lap.
yeah. So taking refuge is inviting the experience of what's always already true.
Yes,
And I guess what I was angling at is that when the longing for sensing, experiencing, knowing, realizing the deeper nature of reality becomes stronger than any other longing, then it inevitably bears fruit. But if
yeah,
it doesn't become stronger than any other longing, well, that's all good too, because your other longing is stronger, and that's the one that's the one that
exactly.
constitutes your path.
Exactly. Anugraha is always there. And the longing to know is anugraha, the longing to know, you know, something else is also anugraha. Nothing escapes anugraha, in my opinion. Nothing escapes it. Life is anugraha. I mean, the ability to wake up in the morning, which we take for granted, is anugraha. So, um, yeah, and that's why I said, stop taking yourself so seriously. Your longing, your path, your this or that. Is just take it lightly, hold it lightly, is what I would say.
There's this beautiful Sufi saying that I love, which says, "No one has seen birds flying south to warmer climes that do not exist. No one has seen rivers making their way to a sea which is not to be found. And similarly, God does not create a longing without having a reality ready to meet it."
Oh my gosh, I love that. That is beautiful. That is so beautiful and
So
so
then,
true.
yeah, it's amazing. So then the issue or the invitation, right, is to identify that longing more clearly and learn how to remove some of the obstacles that we place in our own path,
Yeah.
just to make that path more efficient. We're already on our path, but we want to make
Yes.
it more efficient if we can. And
Yeah.
so this is part of what your renegade method facilitates for people.
Absolutely. And that's exactly right. It's getting out of your own way. And how do you do that? We have heard that for decades. I had always heard that, but I didn't know what that meant and how I was getting in my own way until I said, well, I'm just going to sit here and understand something that is universal. What is our fundamental problem? Why are we getting stuck in this obstacles? And and then it was just, it just showed up in this massive download in of insight. It's like, oh, okay, this is why we keep getting in our own way. So Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so people are definitely gonna look up what you have to offer, and we're gonna have another conversation as well. And thank you
Yes.
for giving so generously of your time.
Oh, thank you.
It's, you are at the top of your field in more ways than one, and it's really just an honor to have you on the podcast, and to connect with you more, because I have even more respect for your work now than I did when we started the conversation, which was already high. So I hope we can continue the conversation. Uh, uh,
Yes,
yeah, and I look forward to it. So thank you,
absolutely.
Kavitha.
It's such a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you, Hareesh.
Hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember, you can always find out more about the tradition of non-dual Shaiva Tantra at tantrailluminated.org, where, if you wish, you can become a subscriber to our online learning portal, and you'll receive access to a vast number of recordings, including a comprehensive curriculum in Tantric philosophy, Tantric yoga, guided meditation, and much, much more. Music for the podcast composed and recorded by Ann Leader. Find her at annleader.com. Podcast produced by Grazia Tribulato. New episodes drop every week, and may all beings benefit.